Want to welcome everyone to the first night of the Direct Marketing Sheep and Goat webinar series. As a reminder, it's a 3-night series, and this webinar is being co-hosted by the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, who I am with, and the Kentucky Sheep and Goat Development Office. We are offering this series for a few reasons. One being to help launch the new resources and tools that are going to be available on Sheep and Goat's website, and Kelley will tell you more about that later. And then the second reason is really in response to seeing an increase in interest in raising animals for meat in Kentucky, which we believe was kind of spurred on by the pandemic early this year. So with that introduction, I'll let Kelley bring us to the next slide.
All right. It's not moving. There we go. All right, I'm Kelley Yates. I'm the Executive Director for the Kentucky Sheep and Goat Development Office. We are an independent nonprofit. We were started in 2007, and our main goals are to provide education, promotion, and marketing assistance to small ruminant producers in Kentucky. We also serve as an umbrella for the Kentucky Goat Producers and the Kentucky Sheep and Wool Producers Associations. So those two boards make up, between the two, our main board, and then that's kind of who calls the shots with what we do. And we have a lot of benefits within our organization. So by having the sheep and goat producers together, it gives us a stronger network and a stronger voice within agriculture. So that way legislators and funding people and different folks like that remember us and recognize us. And then we do, like I said, we do a lot of education for producers. So some of that, when you join a membership, you get our management calendar, which I keep being told all the time, that's like the best resource ever. And you get on our directory listing. And then we have a pretty robust email system. So anytime that there's a funding available or an education opportunity or anything like that, I'm going to make sure that you know about it. So you can check out more about our associations on our website too, kysheepandgoat.org.
Great, thanks, Kelley. And my name is Olivia Vogel, and I'm with KCARD, or the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development. Like Sheep and Goat, we're an independent nonprofit. We play a different role, though. We assist farm businesses in business planning and marketing, business plan development. We do feasibility studies and help analyze the feasibility of new ventures or ideas. We help businesses determine what funding options are available to them through loans and grants. And all of these services are at no cost to, most of these services are at no cost to the producer due to support from the Kentucky Agricultural Development Board. We do one-on-one meetings typically during the pandemic. We're doing a lot of virtual meetings. And my role within KCARD has changed this year. It's a little bit different, but I'm working more with sales connections and local food, but we can talk about that at another time. So with that introduction, just a few of housekeeping items before we get into the presenters and the agenda. All of the attendees are muted and your video is off tonight. You can submit, and we welcome you. Please submit questions through the Q&A box. Your chat box is disabled, so please submit all of those through the Q&A session, and we will have a Q&A session throughout the webinar tonight and also at the end. If you leave the webinar series with any unanswered questions, Kelley, myself, and I'm sure other presenters are happy to answer your questions or get you to the resources that you need. We will be recording this webinar series. You don't have to worry about that. We'll get it up on YouTube. We'll send it out via email probably next week.
All right, so I'm going to introduce our presenters for the night. So Dr. Don Ely from the University of Kentucky is going to be talking about how to raise lambs for direct marketing. Sarah Beth Peridot with the Kentucky Sheep and Goat Development Office, she's going to talk about fiber production basics. I'm going to cover a little bit on goat production for direct marketing. And then we have our producer panel tonight. So we're really lucky to have these two ladies on. They know a whole lot of information. They're super nice, really want to help people. We have Eileen O'Donoghue with Kentucky Lamb and Denise Martin with Martin Meadow Farms. And Denise is goats, and obviously Eileen is lamb because it's in her name. And then Olivia and I are both going to talk about some production resources towards the end, places that you can get funding or get support to help you in this venture of trying to direct market in 2020.
Thanks, Kelly. So with that, just a word to the audience. We might go 10 minutes over tonight, 5 minutes over. We've got Dr. Ely's presentation actually pre-recorded, which I'll press play on in a minute, but he is here with us live, as you can see, so he's here to answer questions. But with that, I will start the presentation. Oh, oops, sorry, one more thing. The audience,
It's okay.
So I registered for the webinar series, how many years you've been raising sheep and goats. And a quarter of you have been raising sheep and goats for more than 10 years. A third of you have been raising sheep or goats for 1 to 5 years. And the rest is pretty equally split between less than a year, not at all, and maybe you're interested, or between 5 and 10 years. So we've got a pretty diverse crowd of listeners tonight. And 53% of you do not currently sell sheep or goat meat or fiber into a local or regional market right now. So I would expect that you are interested in maybe learning how to do that or learning how to improve your existing marketing channels. So, okay, now with that, we will get into the first presentation, and I will mute myself. Thank you.
Visit a few minutes with you folks today with regard of production of basics for direct marketing of lamb. And I tried to prepare for this presentation a little bit by reading a few other publications about direct marketing lambs. And in each one of these publications, it described direct marketed lambs as finished lambs. Now, I wonder what a finished lamb is. And also, how do we know when a lamb is finished? I think a finished lamb is one that, when it's slaughtered, will produce maximum lean and optimum fat in the carcass and in the meat that we consume. On average, across breeds, an ideal slaughtered lamb should be a finished lamb. And an ideal slaughtered lamb may weigh 100 to 120 pounds. It may be less than 6 months old when it is goes to market and is slaughtered or harvested. And then the carcass that it produces would have 1,500 to 2,500 inches of back fat over the loin eye area or over the lamb chop. Then the loin eye area of the carcass would be greater than 2.5 square inches per 50 pounds of carcass weight. 100-pound lamb that dresses 50% would produce a 50-pound carcass, so it should have 2.5 square inches of loin eye area or more. If that be the case, then this lamb should be, when it is slaughtered, with a yield grade of 2 to 2.5. Whereas a 1 is really skinny and a 5 is really obese. 45 to 47% of the carcass should be boneless retail cuts in the ideal slaughter lamb. So does this describe a finished lamb that is direct marketed? Maybe so, maybe not. Dr. David Thomas of the University of Wisconsin built this table a few years ago where he looked at the target slaughter weights of lambs based on the mature weights of the ewes. And let's look at this table and see how to read this, and then I'm going to show you some examples. On the left-hand side, we see the ewe breed mature weight in pounds, and that ranges from 120 pounds up to 250 pounds. So you might have an average mature weight for ewes, like in the poly page, for example, they might weigh on an average of 160 pounds. When they're dry and open, and when they are mature, they'll reach their mature weight usually between 2 and 3 years of age. So then if you have a set of ewes that are polypay and they're 4 or 5 years old, then their average weights would probably be 160 pounds. That's across the breed. And we're going to use some of these weights here in our example. Then look across the top of this table where it says sire breed mature weight in pounds, but then we have a parentheses, weight of ewes of the breed. So the weights that you see across the top are for weights of ewes, not of the rams of that breed. Instead, it is the average weight of ewes in that breed. For example, if those polypay ewes that weigh 160 pounds on the up and down numbers, then they're bred to a Hampshire ram, ewes in the Hampshire breed would weigh 210 pounds. So we're going to find the 210 on the horizontal line that goes across. Here we are with a ewes. It doesn't have to be just polypays. It could be any ewes that across the breed would weigh on an average of 160 pounds. So we're going to read across, as you see on the bluish line that goes across this. And they're going to be bred to Hampshire rams. And the average weight of ewes within the Hampshire breed is 210 pounds. So we find that across the top. Then that goes down, and we read down that column, and you see where it intersects with the 160 line going horizontal, and that equals 120 pounds. That means that these lambs that are half polypay, half Hampshire, should be sent to market for slaughter at 120 pounds, and they would meet the requirements of the ideal slaughter lamb. Here we're looking at some polypay ewes, and they would be bred to the Hampshire ram. This is what we're talking about as far as production of this lamb is concerned. So the way Thomas did this, he calculated the target slaughter weight by taking the 160 and 210 pound ewes, get an average weight for those two breeds of ewes, or any two ewes, and then multiplied by a constant factor of 0.65. We're going to use this 0.65 throughout this presentation to get to these ideal slaughter weight. So that'll be a constant factor in each one of them. And so in this particular case, like we've already said, these polypay by Hampshire lambs should be marketed and slaughtered at 120 pounds. You see, we're reading across from the 160 and down from the 210, and where these two lines intersect is 120 pounds. That's when the lamb should be marketed to produce maximum lean and optimum fat. Here we have a white Dorper ewe, and she's going to be mated to a Hampshire ram. So we're going to use that same table and find out what weight this crossbred lamb should be slaughtered at. In this case, the ewe weighs on the white Dorper ewes will weigh about 150 pounds. And so then we're going to make these ewes to Hampshire rams, and then the Hampshire ewes average weight was 210. So we see that 210 intersects with 150 at 117 pounds. The half white Dorper, half Hampshire lambs need to be slaughtered at 117 pounds, 3 pounds lighter weight than the polypay Hampshire lambs that we just talked about. calculation of this is exactly the same way as we saw before. 150 pound used plus 210 pound used divided by 2 multiplied by the constant factor of 0.65, we get 117 pounds. Now, this is another deal. This is a Hampshire ram made to Hampshire ewes. And we see that the target slaughter weight is 137 pounds. Now, again, we're talking about that the mature weight of the Hampshire ewes was 210 pounds. If we'll back up, we can see 210 pounds ewe on the vertical column. That'd be 210 pounds. And I don't have it outlined in blue for that 210 pounds, but you can read across on the 210 pounds till you get the 210 pound vertical column that you'll see 137 pounds. So the ideal weight for slaughtering purebred Hampshire lambs would be 137 pounds versus the 120 and the 117 pounds that we talked about previously. Now, in this particular case, I have a 130 pound ewe on the vertical column. She's going to be mated to a ram that ewes of the breed weigh 160 pounds. These are a lot smaller ewes than what we've seen before. See, with the polyphase, we use 160 and 210 pounds. This is a 130 pound ewe and 160 pound ewes. That's 94 pounds. These lambs, to produce the ideal slaughter lamb, would be 94 pounds when they're slaughtered. There's the circle, the 94 pounds. See how to read this table. I think this is important for us because if we're going to market ideal slaughter lambs, we need to know what weights they need to be marketed. And then the same thing you can read on this table. The target slaughter weight of purebred Katahdins, Thomas predicted, should be 85 pounds, illustrating great variation as far as ideal slaughter weights of our different lambs. Now, before I get into this discussion on here, I want to point out a few things. With these lambs that I've been talking about, do you think they're finished lambs? Yes. And do you think they are the same as direct marketed lambs? Let's hope so. But maybe they're not. Maybe they are, but let's hope so. I tend to envision direct marketed lambs to be the way more than the ideal. I think they'll be fatter on average, and I expect them to be older than the ideal slaughter lamb. So how do we do this? How do we produce a lamb that weighs 100 to 120 or 130, 140, up to 150 pounds when they're direct marketed and still meet the ideal slaughter lamb description? That is the challenge. And regardless of what weight we plan to sell at, I would recommend that we always creep feed our lambs, whether they're being raised in confinement or on pasture. And the main reason is this, that the younger the lamb is, the more efficient they are in utilizing dry feed. So why not use this characteristic to help us become more efficient in our total operation? So the younger the lamb, the more efficient it is in using that dry feed. And I don't have a slide of this, but you might want to consider this and write it down. An excellent creep mixture is 90% cracked corn, 10% soybean meal, pellets. Folk who was a professor at The complete finishing rations is shown in this slide. A complete grain mix. And 20% we call this round the pellet, and then it's a pellet, we might say. This dietary mix is, when you calculate it out, it comes out to about 15% crude protein, which is based on all the nutrient requirements for these lambs. That's what they need for maximum production. This mix, the beauty of this, I think, is that it can be fed to all sheep on the farm. It can be fed to rams. It can be fed to ewes. It can that are nursing lambs. It can be fed in creep rations. It can be fed in a growing finishing diet. You just feed different amounts of this depending on the nutrient requirements of the sheep that you're feeding. This is another mix that will do well when fed to all sheep on the farm. If lambs are raised in confinement, we should provide a quarter to a half a pound of high quality grass hay per head per day with either one of these grain mixes. If they're on pasture after weaning, that first diet that I showed you can be self-fed out on pasture, or it can be hand-fed once daily at 2% of the average body weight of the group that you're feeding. Example, if you've got a set of lambs out on pasture and they average 80 pounds, they should get 1.6 pounds of the grain mix per head per day if you're feeding, hand feeding or limit feeding. And that will allow them to use maximum amount of the grass and maximum amount of the concentrate mix. The hulls of the second diet, the cottonseed hulls and the soybean hulls, which make up 10% total, they can be replaced with cracked corn. That would make the concentration of the cracked corn up here at 46.25%. Then, if you do that and these lambs are on pasture, then you can self-feed this ration, just like we did the first one. Or you can hand feed it at the same level that we did the first one, 2% of the body weight daily. With both of these grain mixes, or with either of these grain mixes, always have loose, complete mineral available in a covered feeder. If you look at this ration, for example, and the other one was the same, if it has a complete mineral mix shown in this composition, yes, that is true. But we find that we always need to have some additional loose, complete mineral mix available for all of our sheep, whether we've got it in the mixed ration or not, because sometimes we're feeding different amounts of this mixed ration depending on the sheep we're feeding, so they may need to supplement themselves with the mineral mix that would be in a covered feeder. The last thing about these two rations is always provide clean, fresh water. They can't digest their dry feed that they consume if they don't have adequate water. Guaranteed that. So always provide fresh, clean water, as fresh and clean as you can. And ideally, the sheep likes the water at about 50 or 55 degrees Fahrenheit every day of the year. Granted, I understand that we can't all water at 50 to 55 degrees out of automatic waters and so forth. But try to find a water source that can be kept as clean as possible and cool as possible, and for sure, make sure it's available every day of the year. Generating direct marketed lambs. A few thoughts along this line. You may agree or disagree with some of these. But to generate lambs to be marketed directly, I believe it is maybe best for most of us to breed the ewes in August, September, and allow a 6-week breeding period. Then before they start to lamb, we need to vaccinate the ewes for overeating, type C and D, along with tetanus. And obviously, if they've been vaccinated before, this is when you would give a booster. Then we go ahead and lamb in January, February. Some producers, some of you may need to give newborns an injection of Bo C when they're born, because your soils where you're living may be a little short in selenium, and if that's the case, if you'll give these lambs an injection of Bo C at birth, then you can prevent stiff lamb disease that might occur. I recommend castrating ram lambs. Then we can wean in March and April and keep all these lambs in confinement. And if whether in confinement or on pasture, we need to vaccinate the lambs. Now, we vaccinated the ewes with CDT. Now we need to vaccinate the lambs with CDT or with just CD at 5, 8, and 11 weeks of age. The reason I say at 5, 8, and 11 is because at 5 weeks of age, the ewe's milk production is starting to go down and the creep feed intake of the lambs is going to increase. Then we're going to wean at 8 weeks of age. So if we wean the lambs from the ewes at 8 weeks, then their feed intake is going to increase, whether it be the creep ration or the growing finishing ration. And then by 3 weeks after weaning, they'll be eating like crazy, and we don't want to run into any enterotoxemia problems. So after we take the ewes away from the lambs, we send them to consume on the back 40, consume the sorriest pasture that we've got. Then self-feed these lambs that are to be marketed first. Next to the last line on this slide, it says self-feed or hand feed. The first ones that are going to market need to be self-fed so that they will get to market at the weight that you wanted them to be and at the age you wanted them to be. You can limit or hand feed these lambs to be marketed if you want to, if you're going to market them all together, all at one time, or if you're going to stagger your marketings, then you could self-feed those that are to go to market first, and then hand feed more limited feed intakes daily, hand feeding, and this would slow their rate of gain down. Then if you market them later, then you can regulate their gain so that you can get them to your ideal market weight. So that's one of the things I think we've got to consider is to whether we're going to market all of our lambs at one time and then hold the meat and sell it, stagger the sale of the meat, or are we going to have them slaughtered at different times? So, but the main thing here is to remember that it is probably easier to regulate lamb gain in confinement than it is on pasture. And we limit lamb gain or regulate lamb gain by regulating the amount of feed that we feed. Caution here, don't let these lambs get too fat or too old before you market them. When comparing the confinement and pasture production of direct marketed lambs, I think we should think about the following. Confinement produces faster gains generally than pasture, which in turn promotes earlier marketing of younger lambs. It's easier to regulate gains and market weights in confinement. I've said that before. It's also easier to produce heavier weight lambs in confinement than on pasture. But the carcasses of these confinement lambs may be fatter. The highest quality meat, the last line on this slide, the highest quality meat may be produced from confinement lambs because they're marketed at a younger age. Cost of gain may be higher when lambs are raised in confinement, however. But on the other hand, the cost of gain may be higher out on pasture than in confinement. I wonder why. Those lambs on pasture have to deal with worms, and especially if it's in the spring and the summer, whereas those in confinement don't have to worry about the worms. And as a result, you might find that raising these lambs in confinement might be more efficient than trying to do it on pasture, just because you have to deal with these blasted worms. In summary, plan to market the highest quality product possible. To do this, market at an ideal weight and at a young age, so the carcass has maximum lean and optimum fat. I believe that's essential, that they have maximum lean and optimum fat, especially if you expect to have any return customers, because they'll know whether it is maximum lean and optimum fat. Develop a grain mixed diet that can be fed to all sheep on your farm. Then try this on and see. Breed in August, September, lamb in January, February, wean in March and April. Then use your management skills to adjust the feed intake that will produce a high quality product.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ely, for that presentation. I'm going to say that we had 2 questions come in about lamb, so I'm going to see if we can quickly just address those before we move on to a few slides on goat. So Dr. Ely, if you can hear me, I guess my first question is, what is the reason to castrate lambs? This person has heard conflicting recommendations.
Yes. I said to castrate the ram lambs because I'm wondering how old the lambs are going to be when we're going to market them directly. Maybe it doesn't matter to your customers, however, it may matter to others, because the ram lamb will reach sexual maturity at probably 5 to 6 months of age. If you market the lamb prior to that, there should be no problem. If you market the lamb after that, it can be sexually mature, and as a result, it can have some, I guess, what can we say, a little different flavor to the meat, could be a little more gamey type of flavor. And if your customers like that, that's fine. Then I would leave the rams as intact males. However, if there may be a problem as far as the flavor of the meat, then I'd recommend castration. In addition, running the lambs will reach sexual maturity when they're 5 to 6 months of age, and if you've got a bunch of ewe lambs with them, and you're running the ram lambs with them as well, you might find some pregnancy that you didn't want to have. So the reason I said castration to make wethers is on the safe side, to be on the safe side to prevent some of these pitfalls that you might get into.
Sure, thank you.
Is that okay?
That's a great answer. That makes sense to me, someone who doesn't know a whole lot about sheep. So it's a good answer to me. The second question we had was, do you have a recommendation on what should be used for free choice mineral?
The free choice mineral, we buy ours we buy ours from Pipestone. It is a specific mix, and Pipestone is a sheep supply outfit out of Minnesota, and they give us the recipe of how to mix it once we get it on the farm. And we go a little bit further. We have found that when we feed this to any of the sheep, they eat about twice as much as they should. They really, they've got these minerals concocted anymore that they are really palatable. And so they want the animals to eat excessive amount, in our opinion. And we've done some studies with that, and we found that lambs will do just as well if you'll dilute those minerals mixes that you get and dilute them with 50% white salt. This will cut their intake down, and they'll still be able to meet their nutrient requirements or mineral requirements, because theoretically, if you're out on grass and you should meet the mineral requirements. If you're feeding hay and grain, you should be able to meet the mineral requirements for these lambs. We provide all this excess mineral just as a bonus to try to stay out of a trap somewhere, to give them, make sure that they've got plenty. We're probably overfeeding them a lot of minerals, but at the same time, we may be short on some, so we might need to have this available to prevent falling into a trap. So you can buy them at feed stores, southern states. I'm not putting in a plug for anybody, but some of these, and some Eileen and some other people might have some better ideas as where you might buy them. But just make sure that it is a sheep mineral, because if you do not use a cattle mineral, because it will be it'll have too much copper in it. So you need to make sure it is designed specifically for sheep.
Great, thank you. So with that, we will move to a few slides on goat and then fiber. We're going to try to cover those both pretty quickly to move on to some producer Q&A. So thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Ely. Kelley, is that sound in your?
Yep, I'm good. Oh, have I got a crazy sound going on?
Not sure if it's you.
I can't hear.
That's okay. We'll go with it. We'll go ahead and start with your presentation.
Okay. All right. So awesome. I get to follow Dr. Ely. Always the best position to be in, right? So I'm just going to cover some basics about direct marketing goat. You can't really talk about direct marketing lamb and goat together because they are totally different. So we're just going to run through some basics here. I hope that works. So, all right. So now this slide is a little bit deceptive. Okay. I have it marked up as that there's an ethnic market and then a non-traditional market. Essentially, ethnic markets are a non-traditional market, but I wanted to be able to separate these two out so that you could get a better idea of the different outlets that you could do in marketing your goat. So 99.9% of all the goats are going to go through a non-traditional market, and it's either going to be on the ethnic side or it's going to be on really more your farmer's market or your freezer meat side, where you're selling pieces and parts from your roadside market or from your freezer from your home. And there's two completely different kinds of goats. Okay, so the ethnic is essentially equals holidays. All right, so you're marketing around ethnic holidays. So I've listed some here. These are some of the most popular ones. If you're direct marketing to somebody in an ethnic community, you're probably going to market mostly like around Easter. Ramadan has got a couple of holidays built around it, and then Cinco de Mayo. Okay, just where you get a lot of your Hispanics there. And you'll notice that there's a variation in weights here. So Easter, they're looking for about 40 pounds. Ramadan, they've fasted, they're just ready to eat, so they want something like around 80 pounds. Cinco de Mayo is about 60 pounds. Like they're doing like family cookout, backyard cookout kind of things. They want something that they can pit, grill, or barbecue or whatever on that particular holiday. But if you look at all these weights, your optimum live weight is still like around 60 to 65 pounds. And what do I mean by optimum live weight? So Dr. Ely talked about a finished weight, which I'm going to talk about on the non-traditional side. Your optimum live weight is whatever weight these folks are looking for around these particular holidays. Okay, so that's on you to kind of figure out when your animals are going to fit into those holidays. And I do not recommend you chasing these holidays. Okay, do not do your production program to chase these holidays because they change by 11 days every year. you're eventually going to get to a point where you can't hit a holiday because you can't breed your animals out of season at the right time to get these, okay? So if you are marketing goats, hit an ethnic market if you can. If you're direct marketing to an ethnic market, you probably have a wider span within the year to hit. But work those ethnic holidays into your marketing plan when you can, okay? Now over on this non-traditional side, I talked about ethnic being around holidays. Your non-traditional is going to be more of a continuous type of supply. You're going to hit farmers markets and again out of your freezer. So farmers markets, April through November. If you're selling out of your freezers at your roadside market, you can do that all year long. Okay, so again, you're going to have some that are going to breed out of season, but you're going to want to feed, like Dr. Ely said, whether you hand feed it or whatever, you're going to regulate your feeding program in order to make sure that you've got meat ready to go all that time. Now, optimum live weight for non-traditional. Now we're talking maturity. Okay, so this again is when your kids are going to be as large as they can. They have the most muscle on their carcasses without having excess fat. That's maturity. Okay. Now, you may not need to castrate depending on when your slaughter weight is. Again, I have seen some male goat kids just be really excited about what their job is at like 3 to 4 months. Okay, so if you're going to market these animals at a heavier weight and keep them longer, you might want to castrate them. Okay, because they're just little feisty things. Okay. Now, why am I talking about optimum meat? All right, let's look at some dressing percentages. So on a goat, a dressing percentage, the easiest way to think about this is the meat that you're going to take home. It's what's going to be in your box, you're going to put in your car. That's what you're going to take home in your freezer, okay? So a goat, without the hide and the head off, 60 to 120 pounds. If it's 60 pounds, you're looking at about 46% dressing percentage, 120 pounds at 52%. That equates to 30 pounds versus 62 pounds. So if you're paying a flat rate, 75 bucks, 125 bucks, 150 bucks, whatever it is, to have these goats processed at a processor, you're going to have to spread that cost, not only of what the goat's worth, but that processing fee across the number of pounds that you're taking home. If you could spread that out over 62 pounds, your price per pound is going to be lower than it's going to be if it's 30 pounds. Does that make sense? So if you're going to try to run a business and sell these pieces and parts, you're going to want to have it at a marketable price where somebody is willing to pay it. You might want to think about going on that 62 pound side of dressing percentage to make that worth it to you. Okay. Now, I'm going to get to this a little bit later, but we now have an online direct marketing resource on our website. And part of that resource has an economics section to it. And it has a calculator on there that you can go in and put in all of your cost, your processing cost, of what it takes to get that lamb or that goat from slaughter weight into somebody's hands, and that'll help you figure out what that price is. So use that calculator and use that same rationale that we just talked about of how do we need to get that there. All right, so nutrient requirement for goats. Okay, always you're going to want to provide a high quality feed, regardless, right? Because high quality feed makes healthier animals. That's more profitable, right? But you're going to want to have a balanced diet with these nutrients, okay? Only through a balanced diet are you going to get your maximum profit, right? You could feed way too much grain and lose a lot because they can't utilize that in their bodies enough, or you're not going to feed enough grain and they're going to be too thin and you can't market them at a reasonable age, okay? All these folks with the ethnic or traditional are still going to want them under a year old, okay? After a year old, they start to taste a little different, right? And hopefully if you're selling a 60-pound kid in an ethnic market, it's definitely under a year old, okay? Now on this chart, it says weanling, a moderate growth of 0.4 to 0.6 pounds per day. That's moderate growth, okay? Goats put on muscle and they put on fat differently than lambs do, okay? So most of the time you're looking at an average daily gain of like 0.1 to 0.8 pounds, okay? So moderate growth. So a 45 to 65 pound lamb, you're going to feed 2 to 3 pounds per day. You need 14.5 to 16% protein and 75 to 80% TDN. Okay. And you're like, what are you talking about? We're going to get that. Okay. 65 to 90 pounds, 3 to 3.5 pounds per day, 13.5 to 15% protein, 75 to 80% TDN. All right. So let's look and see what that looks like. That next slide there, Olivia. Okay. So here's some feedstuffs FYI, all this information is coming out of our Kentucky Sheep and Goat Management Calendar. So this feed stuff on here. All right, fescue pasture, 22% dry matter. That's 12% protein and 70% TDN. Okay. So the pasture is going to meet my TDN requirements almost, okay, for both weights, but the protein is not anywhere near where it needs to be. All right, let's talk about stockpile fescue pasture. Okay, what we're going to be feeding right now after kind of the growth season is over. Now we're down to 65% TDN and 15% protein. Okay, you might hit your protein under 45 to 65, but your TDN is really low. Okay, they got to have that TDN. They got to have those two together, that balanced diet, to make it work. So you can look down this list. Let's run over to shell corn. 10% protein and 88% TDN. All right, I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but what I'm trying to show you is that these individual things are not enough to meet the requirements of either one of those weight ranges, okay, on that moderate growth. Now, over here in NC State, I just have a quote that they have from research studies that they have done. It says, whether they're grazed or barn fed, goats should be supplemented with a concentrate feed when either the forage that they are grazing or the hay that they are fed do not contain the necessary nutrients to cover their nutrition requirements. And look at this chart. Pretty often, that's not going to meet the nutrition requirements. You're going to have to give some kind of grain supplementation to get these animals to their optimal marketing weight at an optimal time. Okay. All right. Can you do it on pasture alone? Okay. Well, let's talk about what does pasture mean. Okay. Obviously, that's forage. Forage is herbages, forbs, and browse. Your herbages are grass-like plants. Okay. This does not contain any kind of grains. Okay. Cool season, orchard grass, tall fescue, bluegrass. Your summer annuals, pearl millet, sorghum, crabgrass. The forbs are broadleaf plants like legumes. Okay. So you will probably naturally have white clover and red clover in your pastures, but you can seed alfalfa and Cerezo lespedeza in there. And browse is going to be things like leaves and twigs and shrubs, the bark on your trees, right? Your goats will girdle your trees and they'll eat that. You can use the pasture to create marketing animals, but you're going to have to do a very highly intensive grazing system. Okay. Again, if you go back and look at that chart, look in your calendar. If you look at that chart, you can do a mix of different pasture things, okay, and try to meet those requirements. Now, I put on here a link for a research study that was done on finishing lamb and goat kids on pasture. It's a really good research study. Again, they recommend you're going to have to highly intensive graze. I mean, you're going to have to watch that forage. You're going to have to weigh those animals. You're going to have to be on top of that program if you're going to make pasture work. Don't you think you're going to throw those animals out on pasture and you're going to make animals that are worth anybody buying, okay, without intensively grazing them. All right, so you're like, okay, so I can't do it on pasture. Now what do I do? All right, to get these heavier weight kids that you're going to do in a farmer's market or a freezer meat type setting, you're going to have to feed them grain. Okay, now University of Maryland, the small ruminant program, Susan Schwinen, if that raises any reminders to anybody, they did a feeding study, and 3 out of 4 years they had pen-fed animals and they had pasture animals. Okay, now the pen-fed animals had no access to pasture whatsoever. They were given hay and feed, and obviously the pasture animals had no access to grain whatsoever. All right, 3 out of the 4 years, in order to hit that optimal market weight for those heavier animals, the pen-fed animals had the advantage. Okay, just like what Dr. Ely said on those lambs, they have higher carcass weights. They had higher dressing percentages. Again, remember I talked about that before. If you're going to have to spread this processing fee and the production cost across pounds of meat, you're going to want more pounds of meat. They had a higher ribeye area. Everybody wants the ribeye area, like that's the chops, right? Higher leg circumference. Selling legs is a big part of your pieces and parts marketing program, right? You're going to want big ones. And there was little to no parasite problems in the ones that were pen fed. Again, Dr. Ely talked about that, okay? Now, the 4th year, out of that 4 out of the years, the pasture animals pretty much met the pen-fed animals, okay? Now, the pasture that they had was different from the previous years, but they still had an advantage on the pen fed, mainly because the cost of the grain versus the cost of the wormers. And I don't know about you, but when I go to buy wormer, that stuff is not cheap. Okay. So if you can eliminate having to pay for wormers and put that towards the grain, then you might be at a better advantage. Okay. Now I'm not talking about this for ethnic animals. Don't do this for your ethnic animals, right? You just want to get them to a small weight. 60 to 65 pounds is your optimum. So we're not talking about pen feeding for them. This is just for your pieces and part folks. Okay. And you can go to this web address and you can read up about that pen versus pasture research. Okay. Now, just like Dr. Ely said, every animal's got to have other additional nutrient requirements, right, than just this grain and this hay. They got to have that loose mineral. Okay. Olivia, you can do the next slide. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. They got to have water. All right. And goats and sheep don't drink a whole lot of water, but they need clean water. Okay. If they don't have clean water, then they kind of snub the nose up at it. And then they're not getting enough water in the intake. You need high quality forages. There, that's said, right? Your excess energy will be stored as fat around the internal organs, okay, if they're getting too much energy. And then your protein is your grain supplementation. Now, the protein is required in order to supply nitrogen for ruminal bacteria and supply amino acids. If they don't have that, then their digestion is going to decrease and they're not going to take in as much feed, okay? They're not going to feel good. They're probably going to have a stomach ache, right? And they're not going to eat. They're not going to hit that weight when you want them to. And then if you give them too much protein, they're just going to excrete it in their urine. It's just a complete waste, okay? Protein is expensive. That's your grain supplementation. Again, you got to balance that stuff out, okay? Always, always have mineral available. Again, we're a very selenium deficient state, so don't feel bad about sticking some extra selenium in there. Your vitamins are going to be in with your mineral mix. If you're feeding a bagged feed mix and it's called a complete feed, you probably have enough vitamins in that already. And then if you're going to grain feed your animals, you're going to have to make sure you pay attention to urinary calculi. So you're going to want to make sure that your feed has a calcium and phosphorus ratio of about 2 to 1 to 4 to 1. And you can just look at that on your feed. Now, I did not provide you a ration like Dr. Ely did. I wish I had a really good one, but for the most part, you guys are going to feed bag feed from your local store, right? I mean, that's what I do based on the number of animals that I have. So talk to your feed store, take your feed tag in and say, hey, I want to make sure I got enough calcium and phosphorus in this. Does it have the minerals and stuff in it that I need? And if they can't answer your question, you should probably find another feed store. Okay. All right. So in summary, you got the non-traditional market. Two aspects of that is the ethnic and literally like your farmer's market, your roadside market. Okay. The ethnic market is going to want them smaller. Utilize that forage, okay, on those smaller animals. Your heavier weights, you're going to have to give them some grain. Okay. Make sure that that grain forage diet is balanced. Because again, you don't want them urinating your profits out. Okay. And you don't want them not eating and not getting up to that weight because your stomach hurts. All right. And so you're going to use those grain supplements to reach that optimum market weight. Again, you can ration your feed to meet those weights throughout the year. Okay. Just like what Dr. Ely said. So, all right. I think I got some questions, right?
Yeah. Hey, Kelley. So if people don't know that there's the Q&A section, Kelley, would you mind to answer those by typing the answer, like as we move on to the rest of the presentation? So you can look for the typed answers in the Q&A section. And we're going to move on to fiber. And I think Sarah Beth is going to do a quicker version of this so that we make sure we have time for the producers.
Yes.
So,
yes, ma'am. Okay, so and I'm Sarah Beth Peridot. I am the director of wool and fiber marketing through we'll start at the beginning of the slides and I'll just really quick run through them though, I promise.
Sorry.
That slide right there is perfect. That's perfect. So as we are raising our sheep, or also fiber goats. I don't want to leave them out. A lot of the things we're going to go over today are very similar for both fiber goats and for wool sheep. Even if you are raising a dual purpose breed, your wool, your fiber is valuable. And so we can go on to the next one there. It's produced, your wool is produced all year long. Your fiber is a year-long process. It shows up in your nutrition and care with your pasture, your protein, your minerals and water, and your, sorry, next one.
Management is showing up on
Here it
my
is, management. Yep. And that's where I want to really quick talk about your field management, your pasture management. The trick to raising good fiber as you are raising your sheep and your goats is a lot of it's going to take, it's going to show up in your pasture management. As you are feeding, even if you are feeding hay, if you're in that part of the year that you are feeding hay, and you have sheep that you want to keep clean, that means that you're going to want to make sure that their feeders are on a lower level so that they are not rolling in it, they are not climbing on it, that you're not throwing the hay in over the tops of them and getting the hay all over their backs. And this is one that I actually thought about this morning as I was doing the exact thing that I'm telling you not to do. I was feeding some sheep this morning, and 3 of them climbed right underneath as I was throwing hay over, and I thought, I am about to teach on this and I am not doing a good job. But you just want to do anything that you can do to keep that wool as clean as possible. I know that this time of year, it starts to get a little muddy. It starts to get a little sludgy in our fields. And the sheep start to look, if you have white sheep, they start to look a little bit more like brown sheep out in your field. And most of that dirt and most of that contaminant will come out of your wool in a wash. That is not something to worry about. You're just wanting to keep a good management of your fields so that you are not adding to the work that you're going to be doing in the processing of your fleeces. Okay, we can move on. So as you start to feed your sheep, I'm not gonna, I think Dr. Ely and Kelley did such a good job talking about the nutritional needs of your sheep. All of those things are the same if you are raising sheep for fiber. Your protein is important. Your fresh water and your clean water is very important. And these things will actually show up in your wool. You can have tender spots, you can have breakage spots, you can have lines across the fiber that you can see consistently throughout a whole fleece where a sheep has gone through a stressed time, where they might have had a nutritional deficiency during a specific month. You can, a few summers ago, we had that drought come through, and almost all of my sheep had a specific breakage line during that drought period where we were supplementing their water source, and we were trying to do that. Their health will show up in their fleeces. So as you have a year-round effort in your wool, you will see it come out in the fleece at the end during shearing time. Shearing time is what I want to spend a little bit more of our time talking about tonight. Shearing is a very large undertaking. It's important no matter what type of wool or fiber animal you are breeding and raising. Whether you have 2 sheep or 200, you are going to want to be getting the most value out of your wool. So your sheep should be rounded up. You need to have your sheep at least in a enclosed area or someplace that's easily accessible for your shear when they arrive. Most shears will charge you extra, or should maybe charge you extra if they are having to go out in your field and chase your sheep down for you. Your sheep are not going to recognize your shear, even if they see them once a year. They're only seeing them once a year. They're not going to be familiar with them, and they are going to be a little less friendly to them than they may be to you. So don't make your shear chase them down. They need to be rounded up in a run if possible, so that they can be easily brought out and sheared. The sheep need to be dry. This is very important. A lot of times your shear will have to reschedule you. If you have left your sheep out in the rain, it's detrimental to the sheep shearing equipment. It also can just add to the stress if they're trying to shear them at all while they're wet. And it's not going to give you what you want out of your fleeces. It's not going to protect the value of your wool. Sheep should also be kept off food and water, at least especially food, pasture, for at least 8 to 12 hours prior to shearing, so that you avoid that gas buildup in their rumens. It's uncomfortable for the sheep, but it can also add stress, put them into stress, and could lead to death. If you have a sheep that stresses out, it can lead to death. They will begin panting, and it can lead to high health problems. So make sure that you keep them off that feed. It's not a punishment to them. They will be fine. It's just to make it the most comfortable for the sheep as they're being sheared. Your shear is also going to need a clean, flat surface. As you see in this picture, the sheep shears are using a plywood surface. You can also use a rubberized mat. You can use an old carpet, a piece of remnant of carpet, whatever you have, you can use. Sometimes the shears provide that, but just in case, having all the extra things on hand for your shear will make the day go better for you. You're going to also want to have your supplies ready. So your bags that you're going to collect your fleeces in, any type of notebooks that you have on hand to keep health records in. You might want to have a scale ready so you can weigh each fleece as it's being taken off the sheep, so you can keep track of that as well. If you want to do your vetting and some of the things that you need to do annually to your sheep, or if you want to try to trim hooves or do anything first aid wise to your animals, you can do it during this time. Some shears, you'll have to check with your shear ahead of time. It's always good to let them know what you're hoping to do while they have your sheep on its rump there while they're shearing, or on the stand if you're shearing on a stand. But letting them know what you're expecting during this time is also very helpful. You can do a FMACHA check at this time, give a dewormer. Try to keep the things that you are going to do to your sheep while they're sat down. Try to keep those to a minimum, only again to reduce the stress on the animal. You're going to want to have all of those things ready: a first aid kit, water for your shears, food and snacks for them. It can be a very long day for them. So make sure that your shears are comfortable. If you would like to skirt your fleeces during the shearing day, you can do that all at one time. Having help is very, very helpful for this. But as you're skirting, you're just removing unwanted and unusable parts of your fleece. It basically is the outside edges, the stained bits, the tags, all of the parts of the fleece that you do not want, the heavily contaminated spots, the parts of the wool that have a lot of hay and grass and dirt, twigs, all of those pieces you're going to want to skirt off. Having help is helpful for this because you can usually do a skirting as the shear is shearing the next sheep. If you have a couple extra helpers on hand, you can make this go very, very smoothly. As you bag your fleeces, you're going to want to keep them open. If you tie them up, it can be a beginner's mistake, but it can lead to mold, and it can lead to mildew setting into your fleeces, which will render your fleeces pretty unusable. If you pack them loosely in the bags, you can fit more than one fleece into a bag. Sometimes people think that you need to keep one bag to one sheep, but you can fit more than one in a bag. So all wool, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get us through this information so quickly. All wool is very valuable. All wool has value. So all fiber that comes off your animals can be used and can be an added value to your farm and your production. Even if you think, well, my sheep aren't wool sheep, there is a buyer out there that is looking for something like what you have. especially when we are looking at local markets and we are looking at places that people want specific things. One of the things that we've been contacted at the office about quite recently on more than one occasion now is beekeepers looking for wool to insulate the beehives. So there is more than one way to use wool. There is more than 100 different ways that the wool is out there, in different types and breeds of wool that you can use and you can utilize. And you all have it in your farms, and we want to be able to help you find places that you can use it and it can be a profit to you.
Thank you, Sarah Beth. I wasn't trying to rush you. I just wasn't sure if there was another point on the slide. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so now we're going to have a couple slides from both Eileen and Denise. And I think I've got Eileen coming up first. So I will let you introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Eileen O'Donoghue, and I sell Kentucky lamb. I'm located in Washington County. If anybody knows, a lot of people don't know where that is, but it's west of Lexington, about 35 miles. I started raising lamb in 2009 with my first sale in 2010. It was a great experience to have my first sale done, as I'm sure everybody else knows. I'm on Facebook at Kentucky Lamb, and that's where I promote anything new that's coming up with my business. My flock is composed of commercial hair sheep, and I lamb 2 times a year. So they're mostly Katahdin and Dorper mixes. It's not a purebred at all. Though they spend the majority of their time on pasture, I do supplement the ewes with grain while they have lambs on them. Not when they're not, if they're not making lambs, then they just live out in the fields. I lamb twice a year. I do it in October and then February and March. And that helps with my different businesses where I sell them. I need to have that to keep my inventory going year round. The lambs are supplemented from about a week old, and they're on creep feed or in a creep area the whole time. I try to get my goal is to have them at 120 to 125 pounds before they go to the processor. And I weigh them about once a month, starting at about 5 months of age. First weight comes when they're weaned, and then after that, about once a month. And they are ready to go between 8 and 9 months of age. By weighing them every month, it's an opportunity to see, 1, how they're gaining weight. 2, is there anything I need to pay attention to? Are their eyes good? Are they, I don't know, is there anything wrong? But it's a real hands-on approach there. Most of the times I band my rams. It's just a management issue with me. They're sold before they get too rowdy, but this way I don't have to manage 2 separate groups of lambs. I can keep them all together, the wethers and the ewe lambs together. And I produce for 4 different markets. Basically, I use the same specs for every one, so I don't have to do anything real different. But I use whole and half custom cuts where somebody will call up and say, I'd like a lamb for my freezer, and I do a custom cut exactly how they want it. I have restaurant sales. The restaurants are real clear about how they want things cut, and so almost everything in my freezers are based on the restaurant sale requirements, but I can also sell those as retail cuts. And I also have been able to take them to the farmer's market. And then last of all, I have my ewe lambs from there. And that's basically it. Quick.
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, we've got some questions at the end. So Denise, if you want to go next, just make sure you're unmuted here.
Hi, my name is Denise Martin, and I live in LaRue County, Kentucky. I began selling goat meat in 2014. I make freezer meat, and I sell at farmers markets. And then I kind of segued into value added products, and I created several. One was goat bacon, one was goat jerky, goat sticks, and then the smoked goat roast. The value added products I got into because I didn't at that time have a market for my cull nannies. And when I use that term cull nannies, what I'm talking about are animals that have reached their limit in production of other goat kids. Sometimes they don't breed, and sometimes they're just too old, or their udders got bad, or they fell down in their hocks there, or they became evil witches. Because, you know, bad moms make great goat burger. One of the things I don't use at all in any of my products are bucks. Sexually mature male goats have a very distinct odor about them that you can also taste in their meat. And I just refuse to, I consider contaminate my product with that taste. Now, there are ethnic people that want that. They want that bucky taste and smell, but I find that it's real tough to sell the product if it smells like a buck and rut. Now, for my freezer meat, I use 120-pound castrated males. And with my Boer goats, I can reach that usually at 7 to 8 months of age. And the reason why I use the 120-pound males is because it costs me just about the same amount of money to process 120-pound wether versus a 60-pound wether. I feed a 16% protein in a pelleted diet that contains a ionophore, which prevents coccidia from killing my kids, which also prevents me from selling in natural markets. I made the most money at farmers markets, and but I did a lot of prep in order to be in these farmers markets. I actually found out that the best way for me to sell goat is to whatever cut I want to sell. I have the most of, say, ground goat. I'll make meatballs at the farmers market, and I'll pass out samples and then the recipe, and then say, here, you know, and then they will buy the product. And I was surprised at how much in my little local LaRue County farmers market, how much goat meat I was selling. And that's just the meat, the ground goat and the goat chops that in the goat stew and the goat roast meat. It's really amazing. But I also was really successful with those value added products. I even used the University of Kentucky to do nutritional labeling for my goat meat, goat bacon, for example, and my target person for that was people with heart conditions. Now, the one problem with that is that there was a little bit of excessive salt, so I worked with my wholesale food manufacturer and tried to get that salt as far down as I could on that goat bacon. I made the most money on the goat bacon and my goat roasts. The pre-made goat roast was delicious, but it was incredibly expensive to have that created. And it's really tough to sell, you know, a 1 pound package of goat roast for $25, which is basically what I needed. So the number one thing I can say, if you're going to do value added, make sure that the product that you choose gives you the maximum margin. And for me, the cool thing about the bacon is I was able to use those cull nannies because, as Kelley mentioned, all their fat was in their abdomen. It's not, they don't muscle like lamb does. They don't marble like the lamb do. So I was able to take that goat fat out of that abdomen and incorporate that into my goat bacon. And that allowed me to use what used to be in the garbage can, you know. So the goat bacon was great. We were able to use quite a bit of that fat also in like the sticks and the little goat sticks and the little goat jerkies, which was also quite profitable, but that goat roast just didn't cut it. Next slide, if there is one. For me, the most challenging aspect of producing and selling goats was keeping them alive, from when they were born until it was time to sell them. Goats are a little tough sometimes. And for me, the most easiest way to make sure that they were alive was to be there when they were born, because I sure lost a lot of them at the birth point, you know. And then the funnest thing for me of producing and selling goat was getting to know people and talking to people about goat and raising goats and why goat meat's good for you. And again, circling back to advice for a beginning farmer, honestly, just sitting out in that barn for 15 minutes a day, watching the animals as they are moving around you and going about your business. You do that every day and you will be able to quickly start to pick out the animals that aren't doing right. They don't look well, they're off by themselves, they don't get up and stretch. If you're not looking at them, you're not raising them right, because you need to know by glancing at them, looking at them, what's going on.
Thank you, Denise.
Are you done there, Denise?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I thought about these a lot, and the most challenging aspect of producing and selling lamb, it just seems to come naturally for me because I've been doing it for a while. But the most challenging part for me is figuring out the finances. Where am I making any money? How am I charging enough? And that's the biggest thing, is, am I charging enough for my product? So that's been the most challenging. K-Card has been real helpful in figuring that out. But it still continues to be the most challenging part. The positive aspect is I love lambing. If I could lamb all the time, I just love lambing. That's my favorite part. But also was the relationships that I've made and the other shepherds that I've met. That's just probably been a real highlight of the business for me. And my advice for beginning farmers is the same, is get to know other producers, share ideas. How are you doing this? How am I doing this? If you have a chance to go on farm tours, go on farm tours. I mean, not right now, but just to see somebody else's setup. How are they creep feeding? How are they doing this? That is, to me, one of the most learning experiences. And also respect each other's business. One of the things that I've never done, and most people, other farmers that I know, is if you know someone is selling at a particular place, you don't want to knock on the back door of there. You just don't want to knock on that back door. So that's my advice, but mostly get to know other producers, because it's just a lot of fun. And when you're struggling with something and you call somebody up and you say, how are you doing this? How are you doing that? You get some great answers. Sometimes it's just, I don't know, but otherwise you get some great answers. That's all I have.
Thank you, Eileen. Those are great. I just wanted to note to the audience that there's been several answered questions throughout this time. There's been a couple questions on processors that are being used, and the closest one to Northern Kentucky, it's not close, but I know Trackside would be not too far of a drive for people that live in Northern Kentucky. They do good restaurant quality processing. But in an email of resources that'll be sent out after this webinar series next week, we will be sure to include a map of USDA processors and custom processors. I have that resource, so I can make sure to get that to all of you. Okay, I know we're getting on time, so I'm going to try to move through these production resources quickly. Two that I wanted to mention tonight are the KSU Small Scale Farm Grant and the SOAR Farm Loan. SOAR stands for Shaping Our Appalachian Region. The KSU Small Scale Farm Grant is a grant. You have you provide match on it, but it's for small scale producers, so you can see the requirements there. They have an awesome educational grant that's $500. You could apply to maybe to do the Small Ruminant Profit School or other conferences that would be eligible. And then there's also a $5,000 limit grant that there's different categories, but value added enterprises might fit into like a sheep and goat operation, especially with fiber. I know there's been several that have been funded through that grant. We will send out links to these resources next week. The second resource I wanted to mention is this SOAR Farm Loan. So this is if you are in a Appalachian County in the eastern side of the state, You're eligible for this $7,500 loan with a fixed interest rate of 1% with a term of 4 years. So wanted to make sure that everyone knew about that. And those are for like small and beginning farmers who are producing food. So, and then Kelley is going to cover a couple resources as well, and then we'll close it out tonight.
Yeah, it's hard to stay on time when you have such a versatile animals to talk about, as I always do. The first thing I want to talk about is CAPE. I think hopefully everybody's heard of that. This is administered by the Kentucky Ag Development Funds. So you would access the applications and get questions answered through your local county extension office. You talk to your ag agent there. For small ruminants, CAPE will cover genetics. So you can buy males, like your rams or your bucks through this. And then also handling facilities. Okay, this is pretty sweet. A lot of people will get scales, working shoots or something like that through this CAPE funds, which if you're going to have small ruminants, quite frankly, you're going to need some way to herd them up and work them because they will take your knees out, people, right? You're going to have this stuff. So check it out on the CAPE. Again, CAPE is kind of tobacco based. So if you have a farm that had a tobacco quota on it at one time, that's going to make you eligible for this. But they have several other programs too, like on-farm energy, and people put up hoop barns with this. So definitely call your local ag agent and check that out. And I think, yeah, so say the next one is EQIP, that's Environmental Quality Incentives Program. EQIP is you'll go through your local USDA NRCS office. Now, folks have put in watering systems, they've put in fencing, pasture management type stuff. The goal is like if you have a lake or a pond or a creek on your farm, they're going to help you develop water accesses to that, which means it provides the fencing and the rocks and that kind of stuff to get to those water outlets without creating additional erosion and that kind of stuff. So EQIP is really good. Go check that out. Varying degrees of amount of money that producers have gotten over the time. So, and then Olivia talked about this. You can get your KSU education grant and then turn around and apply that towards your small ruminant profit school fee. It's $105, but SRPS is for beginning and new producers, so 5 years or less. Like you want to know, we take you all the way from choosing what species of animal you want, creating your facilities, all the way down to creating a production management plan for your farm, so you know exactly when you're going to breed, when you're going to wean, when you're going to vaccinate, all that stuff. If you graduate that course, 15-module online course, self-paced, you get a year to take it. You graduate that course, then you're eligible for a new and beginning farmer loan through the checkoff program. It's a $2,000 short-term loan. People use that to buy rams and bucks, and then like registered females. If you're looking to create a little flock or a herd to create your own males in the future, this will be a good way to start that. Okay, it's 1 to 2 year payoff. You pay monthly or you pay annually. 0% interest. Okay, so but you have to be a graduate of that course in order to apply. And it is competitive. You get several people that apply every year. So take the course, take your notes, use all that information, and then apply for that loan. And then new, we're so excited. So this webinar is all for is that we are debuting our direct marketing online resource on our website. So if you go to kysheepandgoat.org, right there on the home page is a little picture that says want to direct market. You can click on that. We're covering all the information on processing, economics, which is pricing, and marketing. How am I going to get it to a customer on this resource? So somebody asked about processors, that link to the processors is on there. We talk to a processor. He tells us how to fill out a cut sheet. We talked to Greg Renfro from UK. He's going to tell us, what are we looking for? What does dressing percentage mean? When I just talked about that. All that's on there. And then the fiber processing, the stuff that Sarah Beth talked about, is on there as well. The economics, telling you, it's a calculator. It will save your life. Okay, so like even folks like Eileen who say, well, I don't know if I'm charging enough or too much. Use that calculator. So the calculator assumes that you know how much it costs to get that animal to your slaughter weight, and it takes it from there. Okay, all of your advertising, it takes in your overhead, it takes in things like your trailers and your coolers, it takes in all that, and it's going to tell you how much to charge per pound, not per cut, but per pound, okay? Or if it's a whole carcass or a half carcass. It'll tell you, okay? So Kenny Burdine from UK Ag Econ helped us create that. It's a super slick item there. And there's also a video that tells you how to fill it out, okay? So it takes all the guesswork out of it. But yeah, definitely go check out that resource. Super good.
Thank you. Just a big thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Really appreciate all of your time. Anyone has questions, please follow up with us. Really excited about tomorrow night in the presenters. We've got Dr. Greg Renfro going to talk about meat processing. Sarah Beth is going to talk about fiber processing. We're going to talk about business development. And then on Thursday night, come back and we're going to talk about sales and marketing. So tonight we talked about production and hope to see many of you back tomorrow evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it.